Boss followed his secretary after work and couldn't believe what he saw. Richard Anderson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the numbers projected on the meeting room screen. Anderson Investments, the company he had inherited from his father, was facing its worst crisis in 3 decades. Confidential documents containing strategies to turn things around had mysteriously started disappearing from the office. That's when his eyes landed on Jennifer Miller, his quiet and efficient executive secretary. For the past 5 years, she had been the most reliable employee in the company. But something had changed in recent weeks. Whispered phone calls, hurried exits after work, and a folder always clutched tightly to her chest when she left the office. A suspicion grew in his mind like weeds. "The meeting is adjourned for today. Thank you, gentlemen," Richard said, dismissing the executives from the room. As he gathered his papers, he watched Jennifer out of the corner of his eye. She didn't notice his gaze, busy organizing her desk with her usual efficiency. It was almost 8 in the evening when she finally picked up her purse and the mysterious folder. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson. See you tomorrow," she said with the same formality she always maintained, even after years of working closely together. "Good evening, Jennifer," he replied, pretending to focus on his laptop. As soon as she left, Richard grabbed his coat and car keys. The rain that had started falling in New York City that May afternoon was now pouring. Perfect for staying unnoticed, he thought. He never imagined he'd stoop to this, spying on an employee after hours. But he was determined to find out what she was doing with those documents. The garage of the office building in the financial heart of Wall Street was nearly empty at that hour. Richard watched as Jennifer got into her modest silver Corolla and waited for her to leave before following. Her in his black Lexus. The chaotic New York traffic, even at that hour, made it easy to tail her without being noticed. She drove carefully in the rain, but kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if she knew she was being followed. That only deepened Richard's suspicions. To his surprise, Jennifer didn't take her usual route home to Brooklyn. Instead, she headed toward Queens, a much humbler part of the city. Richard kept his distance but never lost sight of her. When she parked near the Flushing subway station, he stopped a few blocks away and watched. Jennifer popped the trunk, pulled out a bag, and, to his shock, changed out of her impeccable business attire into jeans, a t-shirt, and a simple jacket. The transformation left him baffled. She looked like a completely different person. The rain was coming down harder now. Richard grabbed an umbrella from the back seat, pulled on a hooded jacket, and stepped out of the car. He followed her on foot, keeping a safe distance. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older as they walked. Jennifer greeted a few people along the way, who called her by another name. "Good evening, Mrs. Jenkins. How's your George doing?" "Better, Mrs. Catherine, thanks to the medicine you brought last week." "Catherine? Why were they calling?" Her Catherine. Doubt tightened in Richard's chest. Was his secretary leading a double life? She stopped at a small diner, bought a few packages, and kept walking. After a few blocks, she turned into an alley and met a plain-looking man. Richard moved close enough to see Jennifer open the folder and hand some papers to the stranger. "Here are copies of the forms, Mr. Thompson. With these, we can get the medicine for half the price." Richard clenched his fists inside his jacket pockets. So that was it. Corporate espionage. She was selling confidential company information to competitors. That's why the documents were disappearing. He felt a mix of anger and disappointment. How could he have trusted her so much? As he watched the interaction, Jennifer's phone rang. She answered quickly, and her expression changed. She looked worried, almost panicked. "I'm on my way now. Keep her calm. Tell her I'm almost there." She hurriedly said goodbye to the man and nearly ran down the wet street. Richard followed her, growing more and more intrigued. Who was she? Some accomplice in trouble? Jennifer reached an old but well-kept townhouse with a small, discreet sign out front. Hope Haven. She rushed inside without knocking. Richard approached cautiously and peeked through a side window partially covered by a curtain. What he saw left him completely stunned. The interior of the house, though simple, was organized like a small care center. There were about 10 elderly people inside, some in wheelchairs, others seated in comfortable armchairs. A television played a soap opera, and two young women served tea and cookies. Jennifer, or Catherine as they called her there, disappeared into a back room. Richard circled the house, carefully stepping through the mud in the side garden until he found another window. What he saw through it made his heart race. An elderly woman was having a panic attack, trying to get out of bed, while a young woman tried to calm her. "Where's Catherine? I only trust Catherine," the woman shouted. "I'm here, Mrs. Elizabeth, I'm here," Jennifer said as she sat on the edge of the bed and held the trembling hands of the elderly woman. "Breathe with me. That's it. Slowly." Jennifer's gentle voice, so different from the professional tone she used at the office, gradually soothed the woman. Richard was confused. Who were these people? Why was his secretary taking care of them? And how did this connect to the missing documents? "The medicine ran out, Catherine. She started getting agitated an hour ago," the young woman explained. "I brought more today. It's in my bag." Jennifer went to her bag and pulled out a box of medication, the same kind Richard recognized as being produced by one of the pharmaceutical companies they were negotiating a partnership with. She returned to the room and gave the medicine to the elderly woman. "Everything will be fine, Mrs. Elizabeth. I promised I'd take care of you, didn't I? And I always keep my promises." The woman smiled weakly and squeezed Jennifer's hand. "You're a blessing in my life, dear. After my son abandoned me in that awful place, I thought I'd die alone." Son? Abandoned? Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain soaking his clothes. He studied the elderly woman's face more closely, and the world seemed to spin around him. Elizabeth Anderson, his mother, the mother he had placed in a luxury retirement home 3 years ago, when the demands of the business became too intense for him to care for her properly after his father's death. The mother who, according to the retirement home, had run away 8 months ago, refusing to return or contact her son. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Richard staggered back, dazed, and bumped into a flower pot that crashed loudly to the ground. The noise alerted the people inside. Jennifer appeared at the window and, seeing a hooded figure in the garden, shouted for help. "Someone's out there! James, Matthew, come quick!" Richard had no choice but to run. He slipped in the mud, regained his balance, and vanished into the darkness of the rainy night before they could catch him. He sprinted to his car and sat there, panting, trying to process what he had discovered. His mother, whom he believed was missing, was being cared for by his secretary. More than that, it seemed Jennifer had taken his mother out of that expensive clinic and brought her to this simple place. Why? What was the connection between them? And the missing documents? That night, Richard barely slept. Images of his mother, Jennifer, and that simple yet welcoming place swirled in his feverish mind. The next morning, he arrived at the office, earlier than usual, and anxiously awaited his secretary's arrival. When Jennifer walked in, punctual as always, she looked impeccable in her grey suit and perfectly styled hair. No one would ever suspect that the night before, she had been in a humble neighborhood, caring for the elderly and going by the name Catherine. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson. I brought the reports you requested." Her voice was professional and distant, with no trace of the warmth she had shown Elizabeth. Richard studied her carefully. How had he never noticed the signs? The occasional exhaustion in her eyes, the worry when she took certain calls, the rush to leave exactly at 6 in the evening. "Miss Miller, I need to speak with you privately. Close the door, please." She obeyed, though Richard caught a flicker of tension in her eyes. "Jennifer, how long have you worked here?" 5 years and 3 months, sir. "And why did you choose this company specifically?" She hesitated for a moment, almost imperceptibly. "Your history of investing in social causes caught my attention." "Sir?" A lie. Anderson Investments had never had a significant social program. It was his father who had insisted on maintaining a small charity fund just to improve the company's image. After taking over, Richard had reduced that fund to the bare minimum needed for tax benefits. "We're a small firm compared to the giants in the industry. I'm sure you received better offers." "I value stability, sir." Richard took a deep breath. He was tired of this game. "Who is Catherine?" Jennifer's face visibly paled. Her fingers tightened around the folder she held. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then I'll be clearer. Last night, I followed you." Jennifer closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a blow. When she opened them again, there was a new determination in her gaze. "You invaded my privacy, and you've been stealing confidential documents from my company." To his surprise, Jennifer didn't deny it. Instead, she placed the folder on the desk and opened it. "These are the documents I supposedly stole. Copies of corporate health, plan forms, medication price lists, and some old supplier contracts. Nothing that compromises the company's business or has commercial value for competitors." Richard examined the papers. She was right. They were documents related to benefits and medical agreements, nothing that could harm the business. "What do you do with them?" "I help people who don't have access to proper health care. Elderly people abandoned by their families in facilities that feel more like storage units. People like your mother, Mr. Anderson." The unspoken name hung between them. Elizabeth Anderson. "You kidnapped my mother from that facility." Anger rose in Richard's throat. Jennifer let out a humorless laugh. "Kidnapped? Your mother begged me to take her away. She tried to reach you dozens of times, calls, letters, messages through staff. You were always too busy to respond." The words felt like a knife to Richard's chest. It was true. He had delegated his mother's care to the facility's administrators. On the rare occasions he visited, she seemed well settled, if a little down. He had always told himself it was grief over her husband's death, not loneliness or missing her son. "How did you meet my mother?" "I visited her at that facility a year ago. She spent her days staring out the window, waiting for a visit from you that never came." "Why would you, of all people, visit my mother?" Jennifer looked him straight in the eye. "Because she was the wife of Robert Anderson, the man who destroyed my father." Richard felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. Robert Anderson, his father, had been a ruthless businessman who built a financial empire at the cost of many enemies. "Who is your father?" "David Miller. He was your father's partner in the early years of Anderson Investments, until he was forced out of the company after questioning some questionable accounting practices." The name struck Richard like lightning. David Miller, the man his father always referred to as weak, lacking the stomach for business. The man who, according to his father, had tried to ruin the company with absurd ideas about investment ethics. "Did you join my company to get revenge?" he asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Jennifer shook her head. "I joined to understand the man who destroyed my father, to see up close the son of Robert Anderson, who followed the same ruthless path. But then I met Elizabeth and everything changed." "How so?" "Your mother told me another version of the story, about how your father suffered when he had to remove my father from the company, how he always regretted it, but was too proud to admit it. She even showed me letters your father wrote but never sent, asking for my father's forgiveness." Richard searched for deceit in her words but found none. Could it be that his father, the iron-willed man he knew, had this hidden, more human side, one he shared only with his wife? "If you didn't come for revenge, why stay?" Jennifer took a deep breath. "At first it was for your mother. She asked about you since you hardly ever visited her. Later, when I took her to Hope Haven, I stayed because—" She hesitated. "Because I learned that even those who seem cold and calculating can be lost and lonely." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Richard didn't know how to process it all. His secretary, the daughter of a man wronged by his father, was now caring for his abandoned mother. It was ironic, tragic, and confusing all at once. "I'll resign today," Jennifer finally said. "I'm sorry for using company resources without authorization. I can repay them in installments if you'd like." She stood, gathering her dignity. Richard realized he was about to lose not just an excellent secretary, but perhaps the only genuine, human connection he'd had in years. "Wait," he said. "I won't accept your resignation." Jennifer looked at him surprised. "What I did was wrong. I used company resources for personal reasons, to help people in need, including my own mother," he corrected. "Where is this place, this Hope Haven?" It's a house I rented in Flushing. I care for 12 elderly people who were abandoned by their families or can't afford a care facility. I have 2 other helpers, but resources are always tight. Richard felt ashamed, thinking of the luxury he lived in while his mother preferred a simple place where she received affection. He thought of the money he wasted on frivolities, while Jennifer likely spent much of her salary maintaining that small refuge. "I want to see the place officially this time," he said, "and I want to see my mother." Jennifer hesitated. "She may not want to see you. She's hurt." "I have to try." "Please." It was the first time in years Richard had said please to an employee. Jennifer nodded slowly. "I can take you after work, but I can't promise she'll welcome you." That day, Richard could barely focus on work. His mind was on reuniting with his mother, the revelations about his father, and the strange situation with Jennifer. When it was finally time to leave, he felt like a condemned man walking to the gallows. They drove separately this time, with no secrets between them. Hope Haven in the daylight seemed even simpler yet strangely welcoming, an old house painted light yellow, with a small front garden where some elderly residents sat in chairs, soaking up the sun. Jennifer led him inside. The elderly greeted her with obvious affection, calling her Catherine. A few eyed Richard suspiciously in his expensive suit, so out of place in that setting. "Catherine, who is this young man?" asked a white-haired woman with a sweet smile. "A friend, Mrs. Wilson. He came to see our home." Richard noticed how Jennifer, or Catherine, completely transformed in that environment. Her face softened, her voice grew warmer, her gestures more natural. It was as if the Jennifer from the office was just a mask she wore. At the back of the house, in a modest but clean room decorated with fresh flowers, they found Elizabeth Anderson. She sat in an armchair by the window, knitting. At 75, she still carried the elegance that had always defined her, despite the simple clothes she now wore. "Catherine, dear, I'm so glad you came early today. I was just—" Elizabeth stopped when she saw her son standing at the door. Her face briefly lit up with recognition and joy. Then, just as quickly, it closed into a distant, wounded expression. "What is he doing here?" she asked Jennifer, as if Richard weren't present. "He found out about Hope Haven, Mrs. Elizabeth, and he wanted to see you. After 3 years. Interesting how curiosity appears when it's no longer needed." The coldness in his mother's words hurt more than any shout or accusation. Richard took a hesitant step forward, feeling more uncertain than he ever had. "In million-dollar negotiations." "Mum, don't call me Mum. Mothers are visited by their children. Mothers aren't shipped off to clinics like unwanted packages. You were sick. You needed specialized care that I couldn't provide." Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. "I had high blood pressure and arthritis. I wasn't on death's door. I just needed company, Richard. After your father passed, you were all I had left. I was busy trying to save the company Dad built. And I was busy trying not to disappear into the loneliness of that place. Do you know how many times I tried calling you? How many letters I wrote?" Richard lowered his eyes. He knew the answer. He had instructed the clinic to filter his mother's calls so they wouldn't bother him with small problems. The letters had likely been intercepted by the clinic's secretary following his orders. "I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Richard. You have to act. Do something about it." That's what Catherine did. She listened to me, really listened, and she acted. Jennifer seemed uncomfortable being held up as an example. "Mrs. Elizabeth, maybe you should hear what your son has to say." Elizabeth looked at her with tenderness. "You have such a generous heart, child. Always looking for the good in people, even those who don't deserve it." Richard watched the exchange between the two women and felt a pang of jealousy. His mother hadn't looked at him with that much warmth in years, but he knew he had no right to complain. He had been the one who pulled away first. "Jennifer," he turned to his assistant, "could you give us a moment alone?" She hesitated, glancing at Elizabeth as if asking permission. The older woman gave an almost imperceptible nod, and Jennifer left, closing the door behind her. Richard sat in the chair beside his mother's armchair. For several minutes, only the sound of passing cars outside broke the silence. Finally, he gathered the courage to speak. When Dad died, I didn't know how to handle the pain. I buried myself in work because it was the only way not to think about the fact that he'd never be there to advise me, to guide me again. Elizabeth kept knitting, but he knew she was listening. I thought I was doing what was best for you by hiring the best doctors, the best clinic. I believed material comfort was enough. Your father made the same mistake for years, Elizabeth said softly. He thought he could buy my happiness with jewelry and trips. Only in his final years did he understand that all I wanted was his presence, his time. Richard felt the weight of her words. What happened to David Miller, Mum? Renata's father, or Catherine, as you call her? Elizabeth set her knitting aside and gazed out the window, as if seeing the past outside. David was your father's closest friend in college. They started the company together with the same enthusiasm, the same dreams, but they had very different personalities. Robert was pragmatic, sometimes too harsh. David was an idealist. He wanted every investment to have a purpose beyond profit. Dad always said he was weak in business. Your father said many things when he was hurt. The truth is they had a terrible falling out when Robert wanted to invest in a company involved in an environmental scandal. David opposed it, believing it was unethical. The argument escalated, and your father, in a moment of rage, forced David out of the partnership, using a clause in the contract that allowed the forced buyout of shares in a management deadlock, Richard added, recalling the stories he'd heard. Exactly. David received a fraction of his shares' true value and was publicly humiliated. Your father spread rumors of incompetence, closed doors for him in the industry. David never recovered financially. He fell into depression, had health problems. He died 5 years later, leaving his wife and young daughter struggling. Richard felt the weight of this family history like never before. His father's choices, his own choices, had caused suffering that rippled outward, affecting lives he didn't even know. And Catherine, how did she come into your life? She sought me out a year ago, introduced herself as David's daughter, and said she worked for you. I was shocked, of course. I thought she was there to confront the wife of the man who ruined her father. But Catherine is different. How so? She told me she spent years nurturing resentment, imagining ways to get revenge, but she realized it was only destroying her from within. She decided to turn that energy into something positive. She studied social work, specialized in geriatric care, and she started visiting me regularly, not for revenge, but out of compassion. Richard struggled to process it all. The daughter of the man his father had wronged was now caring for his mother and working in his company. What a twist of fate. Why does she use a different name here? Catherine is her middle name, Jennifer Catherine Miller. I think she keeps the two lives separate. Jennifer in the corporate world, Catherine in social work. A way to protect herself, perhaps. And why did you leave the clinic? I paid a fortune for you to have the best care. Elizabeth looked at him sadly. Medical care, yes. But I felt like I was in a gilded prison. Here, in this simple place, I feel useful. I teach knitting to the other ladies, help in the kitchen when I can, have real friends. Catherine believed me when I said I still had much to offer, despite my age. At that moment, Richard understood what his mother truly needed, and what he, blinded by ambition and the unresolved grief of losing his father, had failed to see. She didn't need luxury or expensive treatments. She needed purpose, human connection. I'd like to know more about this place, Mom, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to try rebuilding our relationship. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. It won't be easy, Richard. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. I have all the time in the world, he replied, realizing that for the first time in years, he genuinely wanted to make time for something beyond work. When they left the room, they found Jennifer in the living room, helping an elderly gentleman with at-home physical therapy. She looked at them expectantly. Is everything all right? We're starting a conversation that should have happened a long time ago, Elizabeth answered, a faint smile softening her features. Richard looked around. The house was simple but impeccably clean and organized. Photos adorned the walls, handmade crafts by the elderly residents were displayed, and a board listed the month's birthdays. It was a true home, not just a place to shelter people. "How do you keep this place running?" he asked Jennifer. "With difficulty," she answered honestly. "I use my salary, we get some donations, and some of the residents' families contribute what they can. But there's always something missing." Richard thought of his 5,000 square foot penthouse where he lived alone, the 3 luxury cars in his garage, the first-class trips. Suddenly all of it felt hollow compared to this place where people genuinely cared for one another. "I'd like to help," he said, "not just with money but with time. I want to understand this work better." Jennifer looked at him skeptically. "Are you serious? That means waking up early on weekends, dealing with tough situations, listening to heartbreaking stories." "That's exactly what I need," Richard replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. In the days that followed, Richard kept his word. He began visiting Hope Haven regularly, first just observing, then gradually participating in activities. He helped serve meals, listened to the residents' stories, and learned from Jennifer and the other caregivers how to tend to people with different needs. For someone who had spent his life focused solely on numbers and results, the experience was transformative. For the first time, he felt he was doing something truly meaningful. At the company, things began to change too. Richard launched a more comprehensive benefits program for employees, including better healthcare coverage. With Jennifer's help, he explored ways to make Anderson Investments more socially responsible. Their relationship was shifting as well. The initial formality gave way to mutual respect and gradually a genuine friendship. Richard found in Jennifer a person of strong values and a worldview that challenged him to be better. A month after his first official visit to Hope Haven, Richard was helping fix a leak in the roof when his phone rang. It was Michael, his CFO. "Richard, you need to come back to the office immediately. We have a serious problem." "What happened?" "The auditors found irregularities in the accounts. It looks like someone's been manipulating the financial records. For the past few months, we're talking about significant amounts." Richard felt his blood run cold. Irregularities? Who could be behind this? "I'll be there in half an hour." When he arrived at the office, the atmosphere was tense. Michael was waiting with a folder full of documents. "It's worse than we thought. Someone's been diverting funds from our main investments to offshore accounts, nearly 15 million so far. How did we miss this? Whoever it is, they're good. They used a series of seemingly legitimate transactions to hide the transfers. If the auditors hadn't done a deeper review now for the semi-annual closing, we might not have found out until it was too late." Richard examined the documents, a growing sense of déjà vu washing over him. This kind of scheme was too sophisticated for an average employee. It would have to be someone with privileged access to the systems and deep knowledge of accounting. Who had access to these accounts? Only the board members, you, and your secretary, who processes all the confidential documents. Jennifer. The unspoken name hung in the air between them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. "This is absurd," said Richard, but a small seed of doubt began to sprout in his mind. Could it be possible? All that social work, the story about her father, the care for her mother, could it all have been an elaborate distraction while she embezzled millions from the company? "Should we call the police?" asked Michael. "Not yet. We need absolute certainty before accusing anyone." Richard dismissed Michael and stayed alone in his office, trying to gather his thoughts. The evidence pointed to Jennifer, but his gut told him something was off about this story. She didn't seem like the type of person who would do this. On the other hand, he also couldn't picture her as someone who would run a home for the elderly or forgive the family that wronged her father. When Jennifer arrived at the office the next morning, Richard called her in for a private meeting. Before he could say anything, she placed a folder on his desk. "I need to show you something." He frowned, confused. "Jennifer, I also need to talk to you about something serious. This is more urgent. Please look at these documents." Richard opened the folder and found a series of detailed accounting records, screenshots of internal systems, and what appeared to be printed emails. What is this? Proof that Michael Williams has been embezzling company funds for at least 8 months. Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Michael, his CFO and longtime friend? This is a very serious accusation. One I can prove. I've been monitoring suspicious activity in the financial system for months. Transactions that seemed legitimate at first glance, but upon closer inspection had no real operational backing. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jennifer hesitated. At first, I wasn't sure. When I started piecing it together, I realized the embezzlement began right after you cut the board's annual bonuses due to the crisis. Michael has 3 kids in expensive universities and just bought a vacation home in the Hamptons. Richard examined the documents carefully. The records seemed irrefutable, sequences of transactions that, when viewed individually, appeared normal, but taken together, clearly indicated a scheme. Then why did Michael come to me yesterday claiming he'd uncovered irregularities? Because I told him I'd found inconsistencies in the accounts and asked if he knew anything about them. I imagine he decided to get ahead of it and shift suspicion onto someone else. Onto you, Jennifer nodded. I'm the perfect suspect. I handle confidential documents, work directly with the company owner, and was hired without many references. Richard leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything. The evidence Jennifer presented was compelling, but so was what Michael had shown against her. How can I be sure you're not manipulating these records to frame Michael? Jennifer didn't seem offended by the question. Call your mother. Ask her where I was last night, when Michael claimed to have uncovered the irregularities. I was at Hope Haven, helping take care of Mrs. Wilson, who had an asthma attack. I couldn't have accessed the company systems remotely. The home doesn't even have reliable internet. Richard picked up the phone and dialed Hope Haven's number. His mother answered and confirmed Jennifer's story. She couldn't have been manipulating the records at the time Michael claimed to have discovered the issue. There's one more thing you should know, Jennifer said when he hung up. Your father didn't just remove mine from the partnership over ethical disagreements. My father discovered discrepancies in the accounts and confronted yours. The problem is, the person behind the discrepancies wasn't Robert Anderson, but Walter Williams, Michael's father. Richard was stunned. Exactly. Walter was the company's accountant at the time. Robert didn't know about the discrepancies, but when my father uncovered them and confronted yours, Walter managed to manipulate the evidence to make it seem like my father was fabricating accusations to cover up his own mistakes. Robert trusted his longtime friend, the accountant, and expelled my father. Richard felt his head spinning with these revelations. If this were true, it meant his father had committed a terrible injustice against David Miller. How did you find this out? Among my mother's belongings, I found my father's journal and old documents he had kept. I spent years investigating, trying to understand what really happened. When I discovered Michael was doing the same thing his father had done, I realized history was repeating itself. So you didn't join the company for revenge, but to find proof. At first, yes. I wanted to clear my father's name. But then, I met your mother, began to understand the full story better, and realized revenge wouldn't bring my father back. I decided to use what I'd learned to prevent further injustices. Richard stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city. His mind raced, trying to piece together this complicated family and business puzzle. If what you're saying is true, Michael is probably already preparing to flee or transfer the money somewhere inaccessible. That's what I fear. In fact, I found evidence he's planning a major international transfer tomorrow. Richard turned, renewed determination in his eyes. We'll need help to resolve this. I have a friend in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. I'll reach out discreetly. Over the next 24 hours, a quiet operation was set in motion. With the authorities' help, all evidence was verified and confirmed. Michael Williams was arrested while attempting to access a secret account where he had deposited some of the embezzled funds. For Richard, this situation brought not only the chance to recover the company's money, but also to right a historical wrong. At a small but meaningful ceremony, he publicly announced that David Miller had been wrongfully removed from Anderson Investments years ago and renamed the main conference room the David Miller Room in his honor. The following weeks were filled with intense work to restore the company's stability. Richard and Jennifer worked side by side, rebuilding client trust and implementing new financial security systems. Hope Haven also underwent transformations. With Richard's financial support, the facility was expanded and renovated, allowing it to accommodate more seniors and offer better conditions for everyone. Elizabeth Anderson flourished in this new environment. Her relationship with her son, though still being rebuilt, grew stronger with each meeting, each honest conversation. She became a mentor of sorts to the other seniors, organizing activities and sharing her life experience. One Sunday afternoon, as everyone prepared a communal lunch in Hope Haven's backyard, Richard watched the scene with a new feeling in his chest. His mother smiled as she taught a woman how to make her famous tomato sauce. The seniors chatted animatedly around the long table. Jennifer organized the neighborhood children who came to visit their grandparents and adopted grandparents on weekends. "What are you thinking about?" asked Jennifer, approaching with a pitcher of juice. "About how life takes unexpected turns. 3 months ago, I was stuck in an office, surrounded by numbers, completely disconnected from all this. I thought success was measured in profits, not in smiles." Jennifer smiled. "And now? Now I understand what my father never taught me, that businesses are made of people, not just balance sheets, that relationships are more valuable than possessions." He looked at her with gratitude. "You could have chosen revenge. You could have exposed the whole story, ruined my reputation, destroyed the company. Instead, you chose the harder path, forgiveness and rebuilding." "Revenge only perpetuates the cycle of pain," she replied simply. "My father suffered from feeling wronged until the end of his life. I didn't want to carry that same burden." At that moment, Elizabeth called them to join for lunch. Richard watched as his mother and Jennifer interacted with warmth and mutual respect, and felt a pang of something he couldn't immediately identify. Jealousy? Admiration? Perhaps a bit of both. As the months passed, Anderson Investments transformed under Richard's new vision. Inspired by Jennifer's work at Hope Haven, he created a social investment division focused on funding businesses with a positive impact on society. Hope Haven became the pilot project for a network of shelters for abandoned seniors, all following the same philosophy, providing not just basic care, but also dignity and purpose. The relationship between Richard and Jennifer also evolved. Professional respect turned into admiration, and admiration into something deeper. Between business meetings and shifts at Hope Haven, they discovered more common ground than they ever imagined possible. One evening, as they worked late in the office preparing a presentation for a new social investment fund, Richard finally found the courage to express his feelings. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something." She looked up from the papers, tired but attentive. "What is it?" "These past few months, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Not just the company or Hope Haven, but me." Jennifer watched him silently, her eyes reflecting the soft office light. "I know our story started in a complicated way, with old hurts, secrets and distrust, but I believe sometimes the most genuine connections come from the most unlikely places." He took a deep breath, feeling inexplicably nervous. He, who had closed million-dollar deals without hesitation. "I'm in love with you, Jennifer, or Catherine, both sides of the extraordinary woman you are." Jennifer was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then a slow smile lit up her face. "I've been struggling with these feelings too, Richard. It felt wrong, confusing, too complicated, but I can't deny it anymore." She stood and moved closer to him. "When I came here, full of resentment and seeking justice, I never imagined I'd find love. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." That night, under the starry sky of New York City, two people whose lives had been intertwined by fate, pain, and finally redemption allowed themselves to dream of a future together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, and a complex legacy to manage. But together they felt they could face any challenge. On the one-year anniversary of Hope Haven under the new management, a big celebration was held. The place now occupied not just the original house, but also two neighboring properties acquired by Richard. The garden had been expanded, creating a green space where the elderly could tend to plants, receive visitors, and simply enjoy the outdoors. Elizabeth Anderson, now 76, was unrecognizable compared to the worn-out woman of a year ago. Full of energy, she led a crafts group that produced items sold in a downtown shop, generating income for the elderly themselves. Richard watched with pride as his mother explained the project to the guests. Among them was his friend from the federal police who had helped uncover Michael's scheme. "I never thought I'd see you so involved in a social project," his friend remarked. "Neither did I," Richard laughed. "It's funny how life takes us down unexpected paths. A year ago, I was just a profit-obsessed executive. Today I understand there are many ways to measure success." A small commotion caught his attention. A group of children ran toward Jennifer, who had just arrived with more guests. She smiled when she saw Richard and walked toward him, beautiful, in a simple yet elegant dress. "Sorry we're late. We had to stop by the hospital to pick up Mrs. Peterson. She insisted on coming even after her appointment." "Is she all right?" "She's great. Stubborn as ever, but all her tests came back normal." Richard smiled and slipped his arm around Jennifer's waist, pulling her close. "You've transformed this place, you know? Not just the physical space, but the energy, the purpose." She shook her head. "It wasn't me, it was all of us together. Everyone here contributed something unique, including you." At that moment, Elizabeth approached, accompanied by a woman Richard didn't recognize. "Son, Catherine, I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is Margaret Miller." Richard felt Jennifer tense beside him. Margaret Miller, Jennifer's mother, the widow of David Miller. Margaret was an elegant woman with features reminiscent of Jennifer. Yet her eyes carried a shadow that spoke of years of hardship. "Finally we meet, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice firm despite her fragile appearance. "Mrs. Miller," Richard extended his hand, feeling the weight of history between their families. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your daughter is an extraordinary woman." Margaret looked at her daughter with evident pride. "Yes, she is. Jennifer has always been determined since she was a child. Once she decided something needed to be done, nothing could stop her." "Mom, what are you doing here?" Jennifer asked, recovering from her surprise. "You said you couldn't come from Hartford." "Your friend Elizabeth was very persuasive," Margaret smiled. "She called me yesterday and said I couldn't miss this celebration, and that it was time we left the past behind, completely." Elizabeth smiled, that mischievous glint in her eyes that Richard had rediscovered in his mother. "I thought it was time the four of us had a talk," Elizabeth said. "There are old wounds that need to heal so we can all move forward without reservations." Richard and Jennifer exchanged worried glances. Though they had managed to overcome much of the painful past between their families, they had never openly discussed the situation with Margaret, who had lived through the height of the conflict between David and Robert. "Let's find a quieter spot," Richard suggested, leading the group to a secluded area of the garden away from the party's bustle. Sitting on a bench under a leafy tree, a heavy silence hung between them for a moment. It was Margaret who broke it. "Jennifer told me what she uncovered, about Walter Williams and the embezzlement, about how your father, Mr. Anderson, was deceived. Please call me Richard. And yes, my father made a terrible mistake in not believing. Your husband." "Robert was a proud man," Elizabeth interjected. "When he realized he was wrong, he struggled to admit it. But he suffered for that decision, Margaret. In his final years, he tried to reach out to David, but found it was already too late." Margaret nodded slowly. "David never got over that. Injustice. It wasn't just the lost money, but his reputation tarnished, the doors closed to him. He was a man of principles, and being accused of dishonesty destroyed him inside." "I wish I could turn back time and fix this," Richard said, sincerely. "But I know I can't. What I can do is ensure the truth is known and your husband's name is publicly cleared. Catherine told me about the room named after him at the company and about your speech admitting Anderson Investments' mistake. It was more than I expected." "It's the least we could do," Jennifer said, holding her mother's hand. "But there's something else I've been putting off telling you, Mom." Margaret looked at her daughter curiously. "Richard and I, we're together, as a couple." Richard watched Margaret's reaction closely, fearing shock or anger. Instead, a gentle smile lit up the older woman's face. "I had a feeling. The way you talk about him on the phone has changed these past few months. You're not surprised or disappointed?" Jennifer asked, confused. "Sweetheart, I've spent too much of my life holding on to past grudges. I saw how it consumed your father until the end. I don't want the same for you. If you've found love, especially a love that's required so much forgiveness and understanding, who am I to question it?" Elizabeth smiled and placed her hand over Margaret's. "That's what I've been trying to say too. Our husbands had their differences, made their mistakes, but we don't have to carry those burdens forever. Look at what Catherine and Richard have built together despite everything." The two women looked at the couple with a mix of pride and hope. In that moment, Richard felt a cycle truly closing. Decades of resentment and misunderstanding finally gave way to a new story, one he and Jennifer were writing together. The celebration lasted late into the night. The seniors from Hope Haven, the employees of Anderson Investments, the neighborhood children, all were celebrating not just the project's anniversary, but also a different way of seeing life and human connections. At one point, Richard stepped onto a small makeshift stage to make an announcement. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this special night. A year ago, I didn't understand the true value of what we're celebrating today. I saw the world through the lens of profit, status, and power." He searched the crowd for Jennifer's gaze and smiled when he found it. "It took an extraordinary woman to show me that true wealth lies in the connections we build, in the difference we make in others' lives. Catherine, or Jennifer as she's known at the company, transformed my worldview. She could have chosen the path of revenge, could have used the privileged position she held to settle past injustices. Instead, she chose forgiveness and rebuilding." Jennifer smiled, moved as Richard continued. "Hope Haven is more than just a shelter for seniors. It's a symbol of what we can build when we prioritize caring for others above personal interests. And that's why I have an announcement to make." He paused, looking at Elizabeth and Margaret, who watched intently. "Starting today, the Anderson Miller Foundation is officially established. With an initial fund of 50 million reais, we'll expand the Hope Haven model to other communities, creating spaces where seniors can live with dignity, purpose, and human connection." A wave of applause swept through the crowd. Jennifer stepped onto the stage, visibly emotional, and embraced Richard. He took the moment to whisper in her ear, "I have one more announcement to make, a more personal one. Do you mind?" She nodded, intrigued, and Richard returned to the microphone. "There's one final announcement, a very personal one." He turned to Jennifer and took her hands. "Jennifer Catherine Miller, you came into my life like a storm, tearing down everything I thought I knew about myself and the world. You challenged me, taught me, transformed me, and in that process the unexpected happened. I fell in love with the most incredible woman I've ever met." A collective gasp swept through the audience as Richard knelt and pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know our story is complicated, that we carry the weight of two families with a painful past, but I also know that together we're building something greater than ourselves. Something that transcends that past and lights up the future. Catherine, would you marry me?" For a moment, Jennifer stood frozen, staring at the ring and at Richard. Tears began streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, Richard. Yes, dear." Listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Elizabeth and Margaret embraced, crying together, a perfect symbol of the family's reconciliation. The celebration took on new meaning that night. It wasn't just Hope Haven's anniversary or the launch of the new foundation, but also the promise of a future where past mistakes gave way to fresh beginnings. Months later, in a simple ceremony held in Hope Haven's garden, Richard and Jennifer married. The home's elderly residents participated actively, some as witnesses, others helping with decorations or preparing the celebration. Elizabeth and Margaret, sitting together in the front row, were living proof that it's never too late to forgive and rebuild. The employees of Anderson Investments, now part of a company with renewed values, celebrated their boss's union with the woman who had indirectly transformed their working conditions and outlook as well. When the judge declared Richard and Jennifer husband and wife, it wasn't just two people uniting. It was two stories, two families, two legacies finally finding common ground. At the reception that followed, as the newlyweds danced under the garden lights, Mrs. Wilson, one of Hope Haven's longest residents, remarked to Elizabeth, "Who would have thought that rainy night when Catherine showed up soaked, saying she'd been followed, would end like this? Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" Elizabeth smiled, watching her son and now daughter-in-law dancing, lost in each other's eyes. "The greatest lesson I've learned, Wilson, is that it's never too late to start over. Not for me at 76, not for my stubborn son, not for anyone." The Anderson Miller Foundation grew rapidly in the following years. The Hope Haven model was replicated in other cities, always maintaining the original philosophy, creating spaces where seniors could live with dignity and purpose, not just receiving basic care, but actively contributing to the community. Anderson Investments, under the joint leadership of Richard and Jennifer, became a benchmark for socially responsible investing. The David Miller Room was no longer just a symbol of historical reconciliation, but the space where investors and social entrepreneurs gathered to discuss projects that combined financial returns with positive societal impact. Richard and Jennifer eventually had two children, David, named after the grandfather he never met, and Elizabeth, after the grandmother who became a model of resilience for the whole family. The two grandmothers, Elizabeth and Margaret, formed an unlikely but powerful partnership. Together, they created a mentorship program where seniors shared their skills and knowledge with young people from underserved communities. The program Bridges Between Generations soon became as successful as the Hope Havens. On a sunny afternoon, 5 years after that rainy night when Richard followed Jennifer through the streets of New York City, the family gathered for a picnic in the garden of the home they now shared. The children ran across the grass, chased by a dog adopted from the local shelter. Elizabeth and Margaret chatted excitedly about plans to expand the mentoring program. Richard watched the scene with a full heart. Jennifer approached and laced her fingers through his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About how unpredictable life is. If that night you hadn't noticed you were being followed, if I hadn't slipped in that mud," Jennifer smiled, "maybe we still would have ended up here, just by a different path. I like to think some things are meant to happen no matter what obstacles we face." "Getting philosophical, Mrs. Anderson Miller?" "Just grateful, Mr. Anderson Miller. Grateful you had the courage to follow your secretary that rainy night, and for everything that came after." Richard held her close, reflecting on how a decision made out of suspicion and distrust had led him to the greatest gift of his life, a true family, a meaningful purpose, and a love that transcended generations of hurt. What began as a story of spying and suspicion had turned into a journey of redemption and love that would continue to impact lives for years to come. And all because, on a rainy night, a boss decided to follow his secretary after work and couldn't believe what he saw. The end. So what did you think of this story of redemption and second chances? Do you believe forgiveness has that transformative power? Leave a like, share this story with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next heartwarming tales. Your opinion means the world to us.